vibrant in every atom. Oh, hidden light shining in every creature. Oh, hidden love embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. आप सभी का शंकर लॉज दिल्ली की शनिवार शाम की मीटिंग में स्वागत है। आज हमारे बीच हमारी बहन सोनाल मुरली जी मौजूद हैं और उनका टॉपिक है बहुत ही अच्छा, ग्रोइंग इन विजडम। सोनाल मुरली जी बहुत पुराने समय से थियोसॉफिकल सोसाइटी के साथ जुड़ी हुई हैं, करीब करीब सन 1980 से, और बहुत ही एकम्प्लिश्ड इन्होंने एजुकेशन में अपने अचीव किया है। अब मैं अनुरोध करूंगा हमारी डॉक्टर मानसी से कि वो इनके बारे में थोड़ा सा परिचय दे दें।
हाँ जी
मानसी
सर,
जी।
जी सर। Good evening, everyone, everybody. Good evening and a very warm welcome to Sonal Murali ji. Namaste, ma'am. Let us know her association with Theosophy Society better over her life journey. सोनल मुरली जी जो है थियोसॉफी सोसाइटी की मेंबर हैं फॉर द पास्ट 41 years. After completing her post graduation in English, she went to Adyar. अद्यार में मैम ने राधा बर्नियर जी के साथ थियोसॉफिकल पब्लिकेशंस एंड मैगजीन्स में काफी काम किया है, along with many other activities at the headquarters itself. उनको काफी opportunities मिली वहां पे, and she has also worked for editorial work to animal rights and education. इसके अलावा कृष्णमूर्ति स्कूल में भी उन्होंने फॉर अ डेकेड काम किया है। अंडर प्रिविलेज्ड बच्चों के लिए उन्होंने जलगांव में, मध्य प्रदेश में और राजस्थान में काफी अपना इनपुट दिया है। सोनल मुरली जी हैज बीन ऑनर्ड अ गोल्ड मेडल फॉर क्रिएटिव मेथोडोलॉजी इन टीचिंग लर्निंग प्रोसेस। जो अद्यार में स्कूल है, एक अद्यार थियोसॉफिकल अकेडमी, सोनल मुरली जी उनके साथ भी जुड़ी हुई हैं फॉर द पास्ट 2 years, and she has given a lot to the Theosophy Society in these past 41 years of her journey. So without further delay, let's hear from her next. Her topic for today is growing in wisdom. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Brother Mathuji, Brother Rajiv Gupta, Sister Mansi, and the other distinguished and senior members of the Delhi Theosophical Federation, as well as Shankara Lodge, and sisters and brothers. First of all, let me thank Brother Mathur for inviting me to share my ideas on the subject for this evening, which is growing in wisdom. And wisdom itself is a vast subject and probably a key to everything. So we can only touch upon some broad aspects of what does it mean to grow in wisdom, what wisdom means, because we have heard it so often that it is easy to be a member of the Theosophical Society, but not easy to be a Theosophist. So, from becoming a member, then we are called upon to grow into being a Theosophist, which is the same to say that we must grow in wisdom, because Theosophy means divine wisdom. In all traditions, ancient traditions, we have had wise people, people who had different perception, people who had certain kind of clarity of mind to think about the right action, and people who could direct to you the right path. And so their advice was sought. Today, things are very, very different. We are living in an information age with the rise of contemporary science and rapid globalization, the world view has changed drastically. For people in general, science has become the primary authority in the thinking of humanity, and knowledge has become power. Now, is knowledge good? Is accumulation of knowledge good? So, if we just look around, it would be quite obvious that as the knowledge increases, the wisdom diminishes. Socrates has also said that the more I know, the more I realize that I know nothing. Mahatmas have said in the letters that as knowledge increases, the spirituality decreases. So, why does this happen? Why is there this inverse proportion to knowledge and wisdom? Probably because knowledge is related to head learning, which is the superficial knowledge of the brain consciousness. And by its very nature, it breeds or gives birth to other qualities which are a barrier to obtaining wisdom. And that is why in Voice of the Silence, it is said that having learnt your own agnana or ignorance, flee the hall of learning. They've asked us to flee, get out of the hall of learning as soon as possible. And we will look at that later in detail. So, the first step probably is to understand the limitation of knowledge. And the evidence is there for all of us to see, because when knowledge is given a supreme place in society today, in our thoughts, what happens? We find that there is tremendous amount of cruelty in the world. There is violence, there is selfishness, and this is without exception. So this has permeated all fields of our life and activity. This is also the age where we have made ourselves the most comfortable. If you look at the history of mankind, this is the age where we have made our own lives very comfortable, and we do very little physical work also. And the more we make ourselves comfortable, the more we are feeling powerful, because we are very conscious of our own achievements as human beings. And so we look down upon the rest of the creation. And the knowledge that we have has made us, instead of constructive, it has also resulted in making us highly destructive. So perhaps in no other age there has been so much of destruction, and it is not only of related pertaining to human beings, but of every aspect of life on the earth. So of animals, of nature, we have reduced, destroyed the diversity of life. We have brought about the kind of devastation that never existed before. Now, this scientific and materialistic worldview, this has been termed as reductionist materialism. So it presents the world science by the way it approaches life. It presents the world with a continuous process of reduction and separation and categorization. So it reduces things to mere numbers, and then it categorizes, it compartmentalizes, and it looks at things in a separate manner. And we have so much knowledge in so many fields, and yet we have no knowledge at all of what will be beneficial for ourselves and to the earth in general in the long term. We have come across many scientists and great people who might have done a lot of inventions, but then they would not know how to be happy. So the situation that we are currently in is an evidence of that. And we are forced to see today, in the midst of the coronavirus, we are forced to see that we cannot separate ourselves from all the things that exist. In ancient times, this was a common knowledge that it was said that any form of harm that is done to others, it will have an impact on our own well-being. Look at the meat industry today. A chicken or a pig or a cow, they are not termed as life, but they are termed as a unit of production. So they have become a number. The world meat production is around 350 million tons. And similar figure you can find in the production of arms and other things. In nature, everything is interconnected, and every creature, though it be the tiniest one, it does its own part in this vast web of life without disturbing anything. And they are often interconnected, they help each other. There are parasites who would be helping, there are bacteria who help the other animals. Mr. E.O. Wilson, he spent a lifetime studying ants, and he says that an ant has a very small head, and so it cannot have probably much of a brain. But a colony of ants, the way they work together in cooperation, and together they make things for themselves. For example, they might build a house and they will know exactly where to build it, what kind of temperature it should have, and so on and so forth. And it seems when you look at these insects and animals and creatures that they are probably much more intelligent than human beings. So the knowledge that we have acquired has increased this feeling of power in the human being individually as well as collectively. And because of this, it has encouraged people to exploit others. So we have somehow used the knowledge in the wrong way, in a broader sense. So we have exploited others, we have been overbearing, we have been callous, and we consider others as indispensable. Sorry, we can't consider others as dispensable. And knowledge has also increased pride. So human beings feel that we can meddle with nature, and to an extent that we think that we can even make things which are an improvement on what nature can do. On the other hand, one of the Mahatmas has written that our knowledge of theosophy must lead to a new way of living, to a new civilization. And this idea was there, very much there in the early days of the Theosophical Society, that the members who are serious and helping themselves to be theosophists, they must bring about and they must usher in a new civilization. And today it seems as relevant as ever. So we have seen the limitations of knowledge as well as what harm it can cause, and it is there for everybody to see. Now, let's look at what wisdom can do. Bhagavad Gita speaks about how wisdom can destroy darkness. It can help us create a world in which there is peace and gentleness, as opposed to the world created by technological inventions where there is chaos and there is no harmony. There is competition and there is consumerism. In Isha Upanishad, a warning is given against acquiring knowledge. It says that knowledge is a sort of ignorance, and it gives us an advice that to be in a state of non knowing is better to have knowledge of the ordinary kind. Knowledge may exist in a remarkable way in the consciousness of scientists and technocrats and many other people who are extremely clever. But as I said earlier, it may not ensure their happiness or well being or that of others. Therefore, the Upanishad says that beware of knowledge. Intelligence is different than knowledge. Knowledge does not make us intelligent, and lack of knowledge does not make us simpleton. Somehow we have associated these things. We feel that if there is more knowledge, the person is more intelligent, and that is not so. Often it is the other way around, where knowledge shuts the door to intelligence and becomes an impediment as it gives rise to ego. Voice of the Silence speaks about the intelligence, which is that which is uncreate abides in thee, because our very nature is intelligence. No one can exist without having a speck of intelligence within. That is why we find that lower creatures doing marvelous things, as I gave the example of ant, or we could see some other birds. And so does man. Man can also do marvelous things, but man does not allow the nature's intelligence to work through him. He does not allow the intelligence which is there in the universe and himself to be just a mere channel of it. If we put it in the Eastern terms, it is the absolute reality, which is being, which is Sat, and Chit is the intelligence, and Ananda is bliss. And no living thing can be without being capable of supreme intelligence, because Chit is there, it's all pervasive, it is there, we are in it, it is within us, beyond us, and around us. But we are not allowing that intelligence to pass through us. Our emphasis is all on skill, on efficiency, on capacity, and that becomes very, very important for us. So when we look at the development of the human being, we are looking at these aspects, because we are looking at these people to fit into the kind of society we have made, which is all production oriented and machine oriented. If we again look at Voice of the Silence and take advice from it, it says that having learned thy own ignorance, flee from the hall of learning. The limitation of our growth into that state of bliss or ananda and shedding it on all others. Limitation in becoming aware of the most harmful of all things in our own consciousness, and that is the feeling of being separate. And this is the crux of it, the great heresy of separateness, which the Voice of the Silence speaks about. And it also says that be humble if thou wouldst attain to wisdom, and be humbler still if wisdom thou hast mastered. If we have to express very succinctly what wisdom is, then I think we can put it in few words, that wisdom allows you to perceive the sense of separateness and to transcend it. When one has perceived that separateness is an illusion and all is one, then all else follows. There is universal love for all beings, one's actions are pure, and the actions are done without seeking the fruit of the actions. Our relationship is without any attachment. There is harmony and there is love in it. There is empathy and there is goodwill for all beings. There is equanimity and there is peace in one's heart, and that peace pervades all around. Someone had asked a sage, how does one know that one is on the right track? Is there a test by which we know that yes, we are on the spiritual path and we are doing the right thing? And the answer was very simple. The answer was that there'll be a sense of peace within you, and that peace would be pervading all around you. And that would be quite palpable. Even others would be able to feel it. One will be with the flow and things come naturally. It would come with ease, without effort. The struggle of struggling against things will not be there. There will be, of course, ups and downs in life. That is part of life. There will be success and there will be failure. There will be achievement. There will be disappointments. There will be pleasure and pain. And these ups and downs, vicissitudes of life would be there. But there will be an inner stability where all these will appear like fleeting images without leaving any scar on the person, the inner being, or without disturbing the stability. There was again another wise man who was asked a similar question, and he said that just try and whatever state you are in, today morning you get up and you are in a state of joy. Just see to it that for the entire day, nothing can disturb that state of joy. Or take some other state of mind like that. And he said that don't let anything outside that happens impact you. Someone has asked about Buddhism, that please sum it up in brief. And the answer was in 2 words. And that was that everything changes. The impermanence of things. For the person in whom buddhi or wisdom, pragya, is not awakened, this affects very deeply. The impermanence of things affects very deeply. It shakes the person. When we are trying to follow it, we have to remember that this is not an idea or this is not a conclusion. So when we say that we are looking at things and seeing that they are impermanent, it should not be a mere idea of the mind, because one idea can be like any other idea, so there is no value to that. It is not a mental conclusion that we will not be affected by things, but it is an awareness in the true sense of the word, and that would bring about an inner state of being that is in a state of equilibrium. Equilibrium means it will be neither leaning towards one way nor the other way. Now, this raises a question. So, what is it to be a theosophist? We began by saying that we must grow after becoming a member of the society, we must grow into being a theosophist. So, what will lead to such wisdom? We can again go back to Madame Blavatsky, and I will take one statement that she has said. She says, he who abandoning the trodden and old highway of routine, which is routine means it's taken by everyone, by habit, by biological inheritance, enters upon the solitary path of independent thought. Solitary itself says that not many are going there, you will be alone there, of independent thought. This is going against the tide, going against what the mainstream society is is pushing us into. Solitary path of independent thought, the God word, and such a person is a theosophist. Now, maybe we'll take bit by bit and try to understand. So, when she says independent thought, what is meant by that? Because most of us would like to believe that we are independent thinkers and we are not influenced by the surroundings. But we do get influenced by our surroundings, by anything that is around us. By it could be people, it could be family, it is our upbringing, by the world in general. Now, media, social media. You have just witnessed how there was an attack on the Capitol in US, because they were all influenced by, they influence each other by sending group messages of hatred. So we get influenced by our surroundings. In the letter to Ephesians, the advice is given that we have to be out of our worldly mind in order to be raised from the dead and made new in mind and spirit. So, worldly mind has been called dead and made new in mind and spirit. And that points to independent thinking without being conditioned by the surroundings. And as I said, by the biological tendencies which we have inherited from generations. We have inherited from the times we were in the animal kingdom. We have the survival instinct. We want to perpetuate ourselves. There is the instinct of self-preservation. There is tremendous amount of fear, and there is desire to get things for oneself, and see that one is safe. Krishnamurti used to say that there are only two primordial instincts which propel the mankind, and that is desire and fear. So you can reduce it to just these two things. So HPB says that a theosophist is an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problem. Now, this independent thinking that HPB speaks about must be the God word. Sometimes theosophists have an issue with the word God, but in HPB's writing, also we do occasionally find the reference to God, and that is not an anthropomorphic personality of some kind, but in the sense of the immeasurable. And so did J. Krishnamurti. He would say, you can call it God if you wish. So, when we are under this constant impact and attack of worldly thought, because we are living in the midst of it, can we remain pure inside? And can we have a clear mind? Can we have a clarity of mind that will direct us? In the Key to Theosophy also, Madame Blavatsky says, much before Krishnamurti spoke about it, she says that we are all conditioned by our race, our upbringing, our friends, and almost by anything, and by the conditions in which we exist. And we can see for ourselves that a view of ourselves or on life or anything, any view that we are holding, it does not become true unless other people endorse it. Unless a million people hold the similar view and they endorse that view. And that is what is said in At the Feet of the Master, that millions of people might think that something is all right to do, but that doesn't become right thing. Today, millions of animals are imprisoned so that others can eat them, but that does not make it right. As I said, the world's annual production of meat is more than 350 million tons. And so that you can imagine, you can put it in perspective, how many more animals are killed to produce those many tons of meat. And similar number of animals are there on whom cosmetics are tested, medical experiments are done, and all kinds of other experiments are done on them. And it is really surprising that on one hand, there is so much of advancement in all fields of activities of life, and we feel that we have acquired so much knowledge from the time when there were only two systems of thought. There was, doctors of philosophy and doctor of medicine. We have now come to a stage where we have number of courses that people can study, different mentality of the people. We see that it's becoming more and more like a herd mentality. We do what everyone else is doing. And of course, we can put the square blame on globalization, because people start to believe that a certain kind of lifestyle, a certain kind of views are to be adopted because it is the modern way to be, or it is the progressive way to be. People for generations were vegetarians, and suddenly they just started rushing towards non-vegetarianism because it is available so easily, and it is the in thing to do. Others are having it, and that is the way to be. Simple life, people were living simple lives with very little needs, very few needs, and all that has been abandoned because of consumerism and the impact of media. On one hand, we can say that world has become a global village, and on the other hand, you can also see how much of separations and divisions are created in our mind. So there is the feeling of nationalism, there is the feeling of race, and all this, and the discrimination has increased manifold. Earlier, there were a vast number of people who believed that the earth was flat, and those who had different opinions, contrary views, they were brutally tortured. So, if many people hold a certain kind of view, it does not become the right view. And if we wish to grow in wisdom, we must examine all such views that prevail in society today. Without right views, we cannot become wise. And we can see that so much harm has been done by good and well meaning people by holding wrong views. And when we look at science and religion, we can say both equally propagate a certain approach to life, and both might not be right. Science has impacted us in a major way because it has brought about this reductionist materialism, and religion has also propagated a variety of superstitions all over the world in all religions. In the middle of this is where HPB asks us, how do we remain clear within? How do we remain uninfluenced? And how do we remain independent thinkers? And that thought must be the God word. That means the thought that comes from the higher planes. If the thinking results in indulgence of sensual pleasures, in emotions which create ill will, in theories which promote cruelty, um, then obviously it cannot be God word. C.W. Ledbetter had suggested a very simple exercise. He said that when you have a certain kind of thought, you see whether you would entertain that thought if you were in the company of the Mahatma. Would we entertain, would we allow such a thought to come into our mind? So, independent thinking, it doesn't mean that you are going against society without, um, uh, just for the sake of it. But it must lead us towards the awareness of the sacred nature of life, which is universal life, and not only in human beings, but in everything that exists. C.W. Ledbetter wrote, when the mind is responding to the appeals of the physical, the astral, and the lower mental planes, it is not likely to hear the message that the ego is trying to transmit to the personality from the higher plane. Because buddhi, which is the higher manas, is connected to the concrete mind, which is the lower manas or the kama manas, by antakaran. And as we know, the manas cannot go in both directions at once. So it cannot go into the direction of spirituality and sensuality both at the same time. It can only go in one direction, either go up or go down. So it can go up towards spirituality or down towards sensuality. And our primary battleground in life is that of the mind. As you know, Madame Blavatsky, towards the end of her life, she had created an inner group of disciples, and those teachings later on became available to others. And she says that the entire fate of an incarnation of a human being, it depends on whether the antakaran will be able to restrain the kama manas or not. So when we are in our day-to-day life, when we are entertaining the appeals of this indulgence of physical, of astral, of lower mental planes, which have become habit for us, the message from the higher planes cannot come down because manas can only work in one direction. And so it is very simple formula that the more we are active with the lower mind, the more we lose contact with our higher mind, which is buddhi, which sees everything in terms of unity. And therefore, when we say growing in wisdom, the quest for wisdom means that we are not influenced by anything in all the three levels of existence. And how to go about this is very well explained in practical terms by Madame Blavatsky in her diagram of meditations. This diagram again was discovered after she passed away, and this was given to her after many years after her passing away, and it was revealed by one of the disciples who gave it for print in one of the Buddhist magazines. She talks about the deprivations, what we must deprive ourselves of. What we must deprive ourselves of is what would stop feeding the lower selves. Because by giving in to our indulgences, by giving in to the appeals, to the temptations, we are feeding the lower self. And the acquisitions that she speaks about, what we should acquire, that should be what would nurture the higher aspects within us. And so the deprivations and the acquisitions both go together. The conditioning and the forces of the present day are far stronger and powerful than earlier times. Even the kind of radiations that our bodies receive is 300 to 400 times more than what our probably the our great grandparents went through, and that affects our mind and our being. we are in the densest period of materialism. And for new generation, for the young people, it is not easy because there is such a strong pull towards media, indulgence in food, and other things. And along with that, also, they are completely immune to other things that are happening around them. So it goes, hand in hand. Pleasure has taken such an important place in our lives. And this idea we have received mainly from Western culture, but now it is all pervasive. Various kinds of pleasures have assumed a very far more important place in our lives. And we can even say that the pleasure orientation is one of the chief characteristics of the modern society. So, when we received the so-called scientific and the technological progress from the Western world, it did not come by itself, by alone. It came with a very heavy baggage, and that was the kind of lifestyle, the desired lifestyle and values. And so, without realizing, values have changed. And without realizing, lifestyles have changed all over the world because people are consciously or unconsciously imitating what they see on media. Lot of this is very subliminal. We might not even be reading it or seeing it, but it just, like a flash, it goes in front of our eyes and it has an impact on us. One of the masters has said that you are seeing things with the eyes of the flesh and not with the eyes of the spirit. That is because at the level of the physical level, there is every inducement to do so. So there is a constant attraction towards things at the physical level. And Madame Blavatsky says that it also brings about some certain kind of forgetfulness of the real nature, a drug kind of effect. Because when you indulge in these sensations, they go against the higher manas, because they are appeals of the lower mind, the astral, and the other minds. And the Buddha, as we said earlier, spoke about wrong ideas, view or position. The first step in the Noble Eightfold Path is to have right views. This view or position in Sanskrit means drishti, and it is a central idea in Buddhism. So it is said that these views are produced by the mental conditioning, and in turn, the views also produce the mental conditioning. So it's a perpetual cycle. So right view, the first part of the Noble Eightfold Path, it leads ultimately not to hold the correct view, but to a detached form of cognition, to see things as they are. So the right view leads us to see things as they are. And the exercise begins with acquiring discrimination, as mentioned by Shankara in Vivek Chudamani, the first jewel of wisdom, and also by Krishnamurti at the feet of the master. Later on also, this was one of the principal teachings of Krishnamurti, to be able to see things as they are, to have the right perception, right view of things. Krishnamurti has spoken about this, that to be able to see right from the wrong, from the important and the unimportant, the desirable and the undesirable. And when we look at the kind of ideas that are in the world today, and they have seeped into without even our knowing. One of that is genetic manipulation. We might be even consuming the fruits and vegetables and other things without knowing. So we can probably say that all the problems that human beings are facing are human problems created by human beings. Not only all the problems, by human beings, but all the problems on earth and other living beings are also today created by human beings based on these kind of wrong notions that they have, and because other people did not question it and they all followed in a herd mentality. The biggest result today is the coronavirus and result of wrong human activities, and the kind of activity that was endorsed by millions of people who were living in that country. When coronavirus hit us, initially people were shocked into humility and humaneness came to the fore. But soon, as soon as coronavirus is over, the lessons might be forgotten as it has happened earlier also in history, and it would be business as usual. And that is why Voice of the Silence says that we must begin humbly. The appeals of the physical world, as I said, it brings about a kind of forgetfulness of our real nature. So the more we indulge in all these sheets that cover us, the more it does not allow the light of the logos to shine through us. And it will lead us far from the wisdom. And that is why Theosophy tells us not to trust our senses, and further, do not allow them to rule us. Look upon the physical body as a third person. Take care of it, as Krishnamurti has said, like a horse upon which you ride. Give it the right exercise, right food, and so on. And the same goes for the subtle bodies. Zen Buddhism says that in the beginner's minds there are many options, but in the expert's mind there are few, because there is choiceless awareness and there is right perception. So, how do we reach this state and how do we grow in wisdom? We cannot reach a higher plane and come to enlightenment all of a sudden. It requires work from moment to moment as we are living our lives day to day. It asks us to reflect, to ponder, to observe, to slow down. There is a Zen saying which goes like this. It says, drink your tea slowly and reverently as if it is the axis on which the earth revolves. Slowly, evenly, without rushing toward the future. Accept the moment and be in the moment. Voice of the Silence also tells us that be humble. We have to start with simple things, question everything, develop that sharp mind, like a razor sharp mind that can look beyond the ordinary and see the real nature of life, which is impermanent. Looking at our own attachments, our cravings, longings, our relationships, our prejudices, our reactions, all this, if we can look without any judgment, without like or dislike, without wanting it or without trying to reject it. If we can go on in this manner day to day, probably the thoughts which seem insignificant, HPB says that slowly this inquiry will direct us towards universal problems, and pondering over them will take us to the eternal truths. For us, our personal problems hold a very important place in our mind and in our being. She says, give it a second place. You think about the universal problems, you think about the suffering of others, which is far more in degree, and that deserves our kind thoughts rather than caressing our own suffering and our own problems. A devotee asked Ramana Maharshi, is it not our duty to be patriotic? And he used to give a very striking responses to questions. And he said, your duty is to be, and not to be this or that, which is egoism. To be this or that is what Krishnamurti termed as becoming. So, when we are reflecting, we must ponder on, look at all these ideas that we have about ourselves. There could be simple things like I am tall or short, or I look like this, or I'm clever, or I'm efficient, or I'm successful, or I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm accommodating, or I'm very accomplished, or all kinds of, or there could be also ideas which are of self deprecating in nature, that I'm not good. And that is why Ramana asked, exhorted us actually to ask, who am I? So some of these ideas, we might think they're harmless. What is the harm in it? I look a certain way. I belong to a certain place. I have done this in my life. What is the harm in it? But what Madame Blavatsky says is that this manner of thinking, it will lead you inevitably to the crystallization of the feeling that I am. I'm this or that, or simply I am. And that notion of I am, that itself separates from everything else. So when I think that I am patriotic, or I am benevolent, or I am philanthropist, so it gives a definition to the self-image. And looking at it from a higher point of view, we just have to be and not be something. And similar advice is also given on Light on the Path, that what you have to be is nothing. And it leads us to complete unself-conscious. Another question was asked to Ramana by a bereaved person, and he was asked, can you show us the dead? And he says, did you know your kinsmen before they were born, or even before they were dead? So you can see how his perspective was always from that the highest point of view, perspective of timelessness, of unity, and so on. So reflection day to day on small questions must take place. We have to see how these ready-made ideas, they've captured us. We have accepted traditions, the nature of relationships, all this keep coloring our mind all the time. And that coloring makes us opaque, from not just from the outside, but from inwardly also. It makes us not able to see and insensitive. We lose sight of the inner nature of things completely. And we can see how our minds are constantly centered on our particular problems of this incarnation only. And thank God there is death, so that at least a person forgets and starts afresh in the new life. So all the time we are concerned, centered on these problems, specific local problems of this incarnation only. Krishnamurti had once given an advice to Sunanda Patwardhan when she had gone to him for seeking some advice about her life. And he said, take time out for yourself. So step out of your whatever you are doing for 1 or 2 days. Take a piece of paper and make a broad outline of your life and all the major events that have happened. And she does that. What it will do, that only we would know when we do that. But I guess that it will give us a perspective, and we will be able to see how things have not changed significantly over decades within us. So we are merely replacing habits, we are replacing ideas, our mental preoccupations might change, but in essence, our lives go about strengthening and fortifying the sense of self, physically and psychologically, as Krishnamurti says. So, growth in wisdom is growth into non self and growth into altruism. Suffering is inevitable. We all suffer, we all go through pains, someone hurts us, and it takes a wide variety of forms. Um, and Buddhism says that whatever is transient, whatever is impermanent, it will result in suffering. And in the middle of the suffering, there are enjoyments also, little and big enjoyments. And those enjoyments are also not real, because they will also soon pass. They are also not permanent. When we examine our enjoyments, we will see that it is just something that our mind has made of it. So, being alone might be enjoyable, or being in company might be enjoyable. One person might enjoy having possessions, another person enjoys living a very simple life. One enjoys riding in a car, another enjoys cycling. And the reverse of all this also can be true. And all the above can bring suffering also. Being alone can bring suffering. In company can be sometimes torturous, when you want to be with yourself, and there are always people around, there is no space for you. So we can see that it is what we make of these things. So, suffering and joy is something, a quality that is attributed by us to the things which in themselves are neutral. And it's the way we perceive that these things affect us. So, Professor Rice Davis, who was the eminent Buddhist scholar, he said that sorrow is in fact the result that an individual has taken the effort to keep separate from the rest of the life. So, when you take effort specifically to keep yourself separate from the rest of the life at the level of the heart, that results in suffering, the fear to give up, and all this affects our ego. And some people also feel that if there is no egoic activity, there will be nothing of interest on the earth. And life of most people who are not working on these, it consists in efforts to keep themselves separate. And if we observe ourselves, we will see that how this me, the idea of me and the mind, it pops up all the time. And the self in any form is an absolute block to wisdom. So we are always looking at for the answer for our personal suffering, but the answer can only be found for the suffering of all, that is universal suffering. So any issue, it can be health, it can be adversity of any kind. It can become a problem that keeps us engaged all the time, and it internally actually imprisons us in its all entanglement. So the problem could be of any nature, but as long as it becomes a personal thing, it imprisons you and does not allow you to be free. Buddhist expression is that we tend to be deeply involved in the process of self-cherishing. So we cherish ourselves. We are enamored with our own selves. And it is very automatic. Mr. Tim Boyd says in one place that we are like a cloud generator. So all the time we are perpetually throwing up clouds of different things that affect our mind. It could be worries, it could be anxieties, it could be conclusions, it could be prejudices, etc. And one of the Mahatmas has said that human nature has been the same for millennia. And why is there no change? Because the unwillingness to change our mode of life, and so on. And the Theosophical Society has come about only to fight against these kind of prejudices of the mind, which are perpetuating this sense of separateness, that I am apart from the others. And this is, in Voice of the Silence, this has been termed as the darkest form of ignorance. As we feel one with all people, we regard everything equally, with equal affection, with equal care, then probably we would be growing in wisdom. Buddha had given one example that if you give one pot of food with compassion, with true charity of the spirit, it is far better than giving 100 pots of food with no thought for the other. So the field of buddhi, the field of intuition, it is continually around us. It's within us. It's the field that we all share. It is the realm where we recognize that there are no separations, but there are only connections. And this could be one of the ways of seeing whether we are growing in wisdom or not. That we would be seeing interconnectedness, we would be seeing connections rather than seeing separations. We would be seeing the fullness of life, perfection rather than finding faults with others. So, universality of mind and quest for wisdom, they go together and they are inseparable. And if we have this attitude of inquiry, of universality, awareness that I don't know, I may not know, humility, that Voice of the Silence speaks about, then we can begin to grow in wisdom. And we will also begin to understand the universe, which is so vast, which is so mysterious, which is so profound, and it is so subtle. We'll learn to understand that. We will also understand what is the relationship between love, which is the true spiritual love, and wisdom in the true sense. And then the actions that we do, that will have a quality of pure actions, actions that have emerged from a universal outlook in the person, without any effort or without any sense of the me. With this, I close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sister, for a very inspiring and illuminating talk. You have really described vast and deep teaching in a very easy word. So, thank you again. Now I request, अगर किसी को कोई एडिशन करना है या कोई क्वेश्चन है, प्लीज. हेलो, किसी का कोई क्वेश्चन है या एडिशन करना है तो बताएं, नहीं तो हम लोग टॉक क्लोज करते हैं. राजीव गुप्ता जी.
मेरी तरफ से कुछ नहीं है एंड आई रियली थैंक सिस्टर सोनल.
तो वी मे क्लोज नाउ. हमारा नेक्स्ट टॉक होगा भगवत गीता में परमात्मा की प्राप्ति का सरल बोध. और हमारे नेक्स्ट स्पीकर होंगे 30 जनवरी 2021 को श्री नरसिंह ठकरिया, नेशनल लेक्चरर. तो हमारा यही समय होगा 5 से 6. थैंक यू अगेन सिस्टर सोनाल मुरली, बहुत अच्छा आपने आज टॉक दिया. हम सभी की तरफ से
Very
आपको
much.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करते हैं।
Thank you.
तो अब हम लोग प्रेयर करते हैं, क्लोजिंग प्रेयर। सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामया, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ओम शांति शांति।